Part 1. To every parent and every watcher, may we raise children who bring honor, not shame. This is the story of Sandra, a church girl whose heart was untouched by the dust of the world. At 19, she carried herself like a bloom untouched by thorns. Her smile could warm the coldest room. Her voice, when it rose in song, sounded like water falling from heaven, Gentile, clear and sweet. Every Sunday, when Sandra sang at church, silence swept the hall. Children paused their games. Elders leaned closer, and even the stern Mama Chenier, a woman who never shed tears, whispered once, "This girl is not ordinary." Sandra wore no makeup. Long skirts brushed the floor like a humble queen's gown. Her hair was always covered. She moved slowly, spoke softly, and smiled quietly. When conversations turned to boys or gossip, she merely smiled and looked away. Pastor Paul Adams, her father, beamed from the pulpit. "Look at my daughter," he said, "proof that God still makes perfect girls." The congregation clapped, and prayers rose from women wishing their daughters would grow like Sandra, while men murmured that any man would find peace marrying her. She did not just read the Bible, she understood it. When her mother fell ill, Sandra knelt beside her, prayed with fervor, and by morning her mother was healed. People said she was crafted from heaven's fabric, a dove among crows. But even the brightest moon has its shadow. Sandra's was quietly waiting. When she received her university admission, the church rejoiced. Her parents celebrated with new clothes, a Bible edged in gold, a phone, and small household items for her new life. Pastor Paul laid his hands on her head like a crown. "Go and shine for God," he said. Sandra nodded, her eyes burning with quiet fire, and packed her bag with her Bible, nightgown, and verses scribbled on little white papers. Her bag was full of faith. At university, she shared a hostel room with 3 girls, Doris, Amanda, and Lola, bright city girls full of noise, color, and energy. They laughed loudly, wore makeup, brought fast food, and carried bottles that sounded like laughter itself. Sandra remained in her corner, neat and quiet, with Bible verses pinned above her bed. "Be not conformed to this world, and flee from every appearance of evil." Doris rolled her eyes. "Holy Mary has started again," she muttered. Amanda whispered, "One day she'll join us." Sandra just smiled softly. "This life won't last. God is watching." She prayed nightly, called home every Sunday, read her Bible every morning, and resisted the allure of the hostel's loud, indulgent world. But temptation doesn't always knock. It sometimes slips in like a soft wind, silent and deadly. Part 2. The first slip, everything seemed under control until it wasn't. One evening, Sandra sat on her hostel bed, phone in hand, refreshing her banking app again and again. 50. Her stomach twisted. No message from home. No call from her father. She tried again. Silence. Later, her mother sent a brief text. "My dear, things are tight. We'll send money as soon as we can. Please manage." Sandra held the phone like it was burning. Her chest felt heavy. She looked at her food shelf. 1 cup of rice, half a sachet of salt. No sugar, no milk, not even a biscuit. That night she cooked the last of the rice, her stomach growling like thunder. Across the room, Doris opened a steaming plate of fried rice with chicken. Amanda brought out suya from a nylon bag. Lola danced with a bottle of juice. The aroma made Sandra's hunger sharper. She pressed her wrapper to her chest and whispered, "God will provide." The next day, she borrowed money from a friend, Grace, using it sparingly to buy a small amount of rice and water. By the 3rd week, the rice had run out again. Her body weakened, her steps grew slow, and her nights were restless. She prayed silently, asking God to open a door. But the door that opened wasn't what she expected. That evening, her roommates dressed up again, laughter filling the air. Doris held a glittering gold dress and dropped it on Sandra's bed. "Wear it just one night. You'll eat, you'll laugh. No one will touch you. Just look pretty." Sandra stared at the sparkling fabric. She shook her head at first. No, I'm not like that. But hunger and exhaustion made her whisper softly, only this once. Minutes later, Doris returned. For her lipstick. She froze as she saw Sandra holding the dress. I knew you'd join, she purred. Amanda curled Sandra's hair. Lola applied makeup, and soon Sandra faced the mirror. The girl staring back was a stranger. Red lips, shiny. Eyelids, glowing skin. The dress hugging her like it had been stitched for her body. Doris leaned close, whispering, You look dangerous. By 9:30 p.m., a black car arrived. The driver said nothing. Inside, music whispered, soft and low. Sandra sat at the edge, clutching her small purse like a shield. Doris passed her a drink. Just sip, it helps you smile. The car stopped at a lavish club, lights blinking like stars fighting for space. Inside, the world moved fast, music pounding, smoke in the air, people laughing, men watching. Doris held her hand, whispering, You're safe. They passed through golden ropes into a quieter area where a man rose to greet them. Older, clean-shaven, with a bright wristwatch, his perfume reached her first. So, you're the pastor's daughter, he said, voice calm to calm, as though he had done this countless times before. Sandra smiled shyly. His name was Philip. Kay poured drinks, asked questions about school, watched her like fragile glass, waiting for it to crack. She laughed at jokes she didn't understand, ate food she couldn't pronounce, danced a little. When he leaned close and whispered, Let me take you somewhere quiet, Sandra felt trapped. Her phone dead, no money, no way out. Her mother's voice rang inside her head. The devil gives with one hand and takes more with the other. She didn't know how to say no. That night, her innocence was gone, but she hid it the next morning. She wore her church dress, attended class, prayed, called home and smiled like nothing happened. The following weeks were a repeat. Nights of indulgence, days of holiness. Slowly, Sandra became two girls in one body. Morning found the devoted church girl, Bible in hand, long skirts brushing the floor. Evening birthed the seductive stranger, with red lips, wigs in every color, short skirts, perfume, and designer bags. She no longer waited for Dora's invitations. She chose the clubs herself. She had power, attention, money, and freedom. By the time she submitted her final university project, a strange fear gripped her. Home, where eyes watched every step, seemed like a trap for the other Sandra. Yet she packed her things and returned. Smiling, calm, obedient, ready to reclaim the persona everyone expected. At home, Pastor Paul hugged her. Welcome, my jewel. God has spoken. You will work full-time in the ministry. Sandra forced a smile, her throat tight. The double life continued, hidden beneath the long skirts and holy words. Nobody noticed the cracks, the subtle changes, the shortened replies, its coldness in her eyes. Sandra's church life remained untarnished on the surface, her voice still soft, her prayers deep, her worship powerful. But when night fell, the other Sandra roamed free, collecting gifts, money, attention, and indulgence while the world believed their daughter was untouchable, pure, and devoted. Part 3. Sandra's nights had become a world apart from her mornings. By day, she was the obedient pastor's daughter, Bible in hand, skirts long, voice soft, prayers deep. But by night, she was someone else entirely, a girl who wore sin like a second skin, collecting gifts, money, and attention from men who were supposed to guide her spiritually. She now had 3 phones, one for school, one for church, one for men. Shoes from Dubai, wigs from London, bags she couldn't even name. Dollars slept under her bed wrapped in old wrappers. Her bank account smiled weakly, her body and soul quietly paying the price. Sometimes she lied to her parents. I'm fasting in the mountains, or I'm praying with a sister for 3 days. They believed her. Her father placed his hand on her shoulder, saying, "You'll take over my ministry one day. Can see it clearly, but secrets don't stay small forever." One morning, Sandra woke with a sharp twist in her belly. She rushed to the bathroom and threw up. Hands gripping the sink, head hot, knees shaking, she whispered, "It's malaria, Mommy. I'll be fine." Days passed, clothes tightened, waist swelling. One afternoon, while folding her bedsheet, her mother found a small test strip hidden under the mattress. 2 lines. Her eyes widened. She confronted Sandra gently. "What is this?" Sandra froze, lips trembling, hands dropping. She didn't speak. Her mother sat beside her, whispering, "Not yet. Your father must not know. The biggest secret." And the house began to grow quietly. Sandra's mother bought loose gowns to hide the swelling belly. Sandra stopped going out as often, stayed in her room, prayed quietly, ate carefully, walked slowly. They planned together, whispered in the kitchen, prayed in corners, hoping to keep the shame invisible. But secrets cannot remain forever. 1. Sunday morning, Sandra led worship as usual. Long gown tied, scarf in place, microphone in hand, choir behind her, she began to sing, but halfway through, her knees buckled. She stumbled, collapsed, gasps filled the church. Her blouse lifted slightly, her belly revealed, undeniable. Whispers ran like wildfire. Is she pregnant? How? She's the pastor's daughter. Pastor Paul rushed forward, face pale, voice trembling. "Sandra, what is going on?" Sandra's head hung low, her hands clasped over her belly. When asked who was responsible, she looked up, calm. "I don't know. It could be anyone. I've been with many." Gasps turned to murmurs. Murmurs to outrage. She began calling names, men from the church who had touched her under the guise of spiritual guidance. Brother Felix, Elder Daniel, Pastor Jerry. Shock, shame, and disbelief spread through the congregation. Some fainted, some walked out, some looked down in horror. Pastor Paul sank into his chair, Bible pressed to his chest, speechless. Sandra, once the girl mothers prayed their daughters would become, was now the cautionary tale whispered about in every corner of the city. Pictures were removed from the church wall. The choir found a new lead singer. Pastor Paul stopped preaching for weeks, haunted by the fall of his golden daughter. Sandra's mother no longer smiled, no longer attended. Women's meetings no longer walked tall in the market. Sandra stayed home, curtains drawn, Bible gathering dust. Belly growing day by day. Once lifted in worship, her hands now hid her face. Once soft and powerful, her voice now only whispered to the walls. Nights were spent alone, repeating the words she had long feared. "If only they knew what I do after church." And now they knew. Part 4. The church that had once danced at Sandra's every success was now silent. Whispers replaced hallelujahs, and the heavy weight of judgment pressed on every pew. Pastor Paul, once proud, now sat slumped in the front row, Bible unopened, eyes fixed on the floor. His pulpit felt empty, echoing with a silence that would not be broken. Sandra's mother moved quietly through the house, each step heavy with sorrow. The market looked different. The neighbors' smiles felt sharp, and every glance reminded her of the shame she had fought to hide. At home, she watched her daughter, once a flower, now a fragile shadow. She whispered prayers under her breath, hoping to protect Sandra from further harm. But knowing the world had already seen everything, Sandra herself moved like a ghost in her own life. The mirrors she once avoided now reflected her fully. Her swollen belly a constant reminder of choices made in desperation, fear, and need. Her nights were sleepless, her tears soft but endless. "God, are you still there?" She whispered into the dark, her chest heavy, her throat raw. The men who had taken advantage of her remained in the background, silent witnesses to the chaos they had sown. Some avoided her entirely, afraid of exposure. Others attempted to reconcile their guilt quietly, offering gifts or messages that Sandra no longer noticed. She had grown numb, her trust shattered, her innocence forever gone. At school, news traveled. Faster than fire, her classmates, once oblivious, now stared at her with curiosity, judgment, or pity. The friends who had introduced her to the nightlife tried to reach her, but Sandra no longer responded. The bright, obedient church girl and the wild city girl had both been consumed by the consequences of her choices. Pastor Paul struggled most with his own feelings, grief, betrayal, and a deep, crushing guilt. How could he have failed to see the dangers surrounding his child? How could the very men he trusted with spiritual guidance have caused such destruction? Every sermon he delivered afterward was heavy with cautionary words, reminders of vigilance, but his heart was not in it. Sandra's pregnancy became a lesson to many, a story whispered in homes, churches, and markets. Mothers warned their daughters, elders shook their heads in disbelief, and the city learned the cost of appearances and unchecked desires. Inside her home, Sandra's mother became her silent protector. She covered Sandra's belly with loose gowns, prepared her meals carefully, and walked with her to the hospital when the time came. They spoke little of the past, focusing only on survival and keeping the shame contained. Every prayer whispered in that house was for the child growing inside Sandra, a fragile hope amid ruins. When the baby arrived, a small, fragile life, Sandra held it and felt a strange mixture of love, guilt, and fear. The infant's cries were sharp, cutting through the heavy air of the house, yet somehow they brought a spark of life into a world that had grown dark. For the first time in months, Sandra allowed herself to imagine something new, a chance, perhaps, to be better, to heal. But the church, the community, the family, everything had changed. Trust had been broken, innocence lost, reputation shattered. Sandra's name, once a beacon, had become a warning. The pulpit, once a place of pride, now held only memories of a daughter who had walked too close to temptation and fallen. And yet, in the quiet moments when the moonlight fell softly through the windows, Sandra whispered to her child, "We will survive. We will find our way." The tears still came, but now they carried a seed of hope. Fragile, yet unyielding, her story became one of warning, sorrow, and the painful cost of choices made in the shadow of need and naivety. It was the tale of a girl whose heart was pure, but whose world was corrupted, a story of light and darkness, of faith tested and innocence lost. Part 5. Life after the birth of her child was a delicate balancing act. Sandra moved through her home like a shadow, careful not to attract attention, careful not to reveal too much. The small apartment they rented felt both safe and suffocating. Her mother watched her constantly, her eyes soft with sorrow but sharp with vigilance. Every visitor, every phone call, every envelope was scrutinized. Sandra's child became her anchor. The tiny hands that clutched her finger, the soft coos that filled the silent room, these were reminders of love that hadn't yet been tainted by shame or judgment. For the first time in months, Sandra felt something resembling purpose. She whispered verses to the baby, her voice shaky but filled with hope. "The Lord is my shepherd," she murmured, and for a moment, the weight of her past lifted, yet outside, the world had not forgiven her. The church continued without her. Pastor Paul preached with a cautious fire, always reminding his congregation of vigilance, yet his sermons were tinged with quiet grief. Elders who had once competed for her attention avoided her now, and the whispers followed Sandra wherever she went. People spoke in hushed tones. "Do you remember Pastor Paul's daughter?" At school, Sandra kept her distance. Her previous life of nightlife, hidden luxuries, and borrowed money was gone. She focused on classes, caring for her child, and quietly saving every naira she could. Some of her former friends tried to reconnect, but she avoided them, wary of slipping back into the dangers she had narrowly escaped. The years were hard. She learned to navigate the world as both mother and survivor, teaching herself that her worth was not defined by the men who had exploited her or the church that had turned its back. Slowly, she rebuilt her life, small victories stacking upon one another. She returned to the church in humility, not as a shining star, but as a quiet witness to the consequences of human weakness. Her parents, too, had changed. Pastor Paul softened, no longer blind to the frailty of those around him. He learned humility through heartbreak, and Sandra's mother carried a new wisdom, silent, protective, and fierce. Together, they became a family tempered by trial, holding one another close while understanding that shame need not define their future. Sandra herself was transformed. The girl who once sang with light and faith had been forced to confront the darkness within the world and within herself. She learned caution, resilience, and the strength that comes from surviving betrayal. She still prayed, but now her prayers were layered with realism, awareness, and a careful understanding of human desire, and her child, the tiny spark of innocence, remind her constant reminder that even amid ruin, hope could be nurtured. Sandra whispered promises to that child every night, soft and unbroken. We will rise. We will be more than they expect. We will not fall again. Her story, once a warning, became a quiet testament that faith without vigilance can be deceived, that innocence can be exploited, and that the cost of appearances is often paid in silence. Yet, even in the aftermath of disgrace and pain, there remained a fragile dawn small, uncertain but unextinguished. Sandra had lost the halo, but she had gained survival, understanding, and a stubborn, unyielding spark of life. And in that spark, she discovered the one truth that could never be taken from her. Even broken wings could fly.